Hello, listeners. Been wondering how you can help the show? Probably not. But here are 5 things you can do. 1. Subscribe. Support the show by clicking the subscription link in the show notes. 2. Review on iTunes, on our website, www.afraidofnothingpodcast.com, or on whatever app you listen to. 3. Donate. When you go to our website, click the cute coffee cup icon. Or in the show notes, click the subscription link. 4. Share. Sharing really is caring. Tell your friends and even your enemies to check out the show. 5. Watch. Wait a minute, it's a podcast, not a movie. Actually, it's both. Check the show notes to find out where to watch the documentary. You can also rent it on Prime Video. That's it. Oh, one last thing. Enjoy this episode.
Good evening, cats and gals. We're rocking and rolling at WAON. This next little ditty is by the Evil Streaks from their album Talk to the Dead. It's called What Does Franny Know? And we're going to dedicate this to Annabelle because, well, you should never touch that board.
In a world where nothing is known, nothing is certain, reality is not real. Wake up! Be afraid of nothing. I'm Bob Heskey.
Robert.
The host with the ghost.
This is my podcast, based on my paranormal documentary, Afraid of Nothing. Each episode, we talk to people who see life and the afterlife through a different lens. Join me.
Who is this large man? And what's he doing in our bedroom?
As we lift the veil and open our minds to see beyond our eyes lie. This is Afraid of Nothing.
Okay, I'm here in Salem, Massachusetts, right after Halloween, and it is humming on the streets here. There's a lot of activity. You would think with the pandemic things might have slowed down. Maybe it did on Halloween, but people are back on a beautiful Saturday. So, John, welcome to the show, and why don't you introduce yourselves to our listeners?
Hi, Bob. Thanks so much for having me. My name is John Kozik. I'm not only the owner of the Salem Witch Board Museum here in downtown Salem, I'm also the treasurer for the Talking Board Historical Society, and we're a registered nonprofit who research, preserve, and celebrate the history of talking boards.
Excellent. Now, you were in my documentary, Afraid of Nothing. There was a talking board that at the time you had donated certain boards that might have been cursed to the Magic Parlor. You don't do that now. You actually save them here, and you're going to bring them to a Paracon, which you're going to talk about. At that time, you would come in and you had shared a bunch of your boards as a personal collector. So let's start with you as a personal collector, how you got into it and some of your best, most prized boards that you have.
So I got interested in talking boards because I inherited my grandmother's board. When I went online to learn more about that board, I basically realized that the talking board didn't just look one way that I always thought it did. There was hundreds, if not thousands, of different boards. As I delved into the history, not only, the spooky Halloween kind of ghost stories behind the boards, but also the history of family feuds of 100 years and women kind of being written out of history and presidential history, all these different layers that really just interested me and I wanted to learn as much as I possibly could about it. And so much so that as a collector, I did that for about 15 years until luckily I was able to find space in Salem to open this museum and now share not only what I know, but the collection as well.
So is this mostly your personal collection? Are there any other Ouija boards that people have donated as well for to be on exhibit?
So everything here is from my collection. There are 3 boards that were donated to the Talking Board Historical Society. Those 3 boards have backstories of previous owners having problem with those boards.
All right, let's talk about the macabre a little bit. So when you say backstory, people who, let's talk about each of them if you don't mind. There's 3 of them. So how does a person contact you and send you a board, and how does it end up in this museum?
Well, I think there's a lot of superstitions out there. They've heard stories about boards. So sometimes it's as simple as they bought a new house and they found this board there and they just don't know what to do with it. Not that they had an experience with the board, just they don't feel comfortable being around the board. Other times, it's that people have used the board, had a bad experience with it, and now they're afraid that they've opened the door and can't shut it. And so, being a member of the Talking Board Historical Society, we have a web presence where people would seek us out, and ask us what to do with these boards. So, in my experience, is no matter what the worst case is that people have had, when the board is out of sight, out of mind, the problems tend to go away. So, we accept those boards as donations. And the 3 that have come here aren't necessarily the craziest stories you've ever heard about people using the Ouija board, but they really help tell different stories that are here. And that's really how this museum is curated. It's not to show the rarest or the most valuable boards. It's really to tell the most amount of stories. So I was going
to say, look, if you're... wish I could show it because it's it's in the back of the Remember Salem store on Essex Street, 127 Essex Street in Salem. If you come down this way, you go in the back and it's literally a kind of L-shaped area, which is just adorned with the most amazing kind of variety of talking boards and posters and historic things and whatnot. But, on the wall, naturally being kind of a paranormal intrigue guy, I noticed 3 that had caution tape. One of them you mentioned, it just kind of showed up in the house, correct? They didn't know how it got there?
Correct. Those 2 with the caution, you can notice them as soon as you come in the museum. They have caution tape put across them. And the previous owner of those boards found them in their house. They're not sure how they got in their house. But when they found them in the house, the husband lost his job, and the kids, they started suffering from nightmares. So the wife, she put the caution tape on the board to protect anybody from actually using them. They donated them to the Talking Board Historical Society. And when I followed up with them after I received them, the husband had a new job, and the kids stopped having nightmares. So she believed just having them in their house, not using them, just having them in her house caused those problems. The problems went away when the boards went away.
Wow, and look, historically, before this museum, even with the Talking Board Historical Society, which we'll talk about in a minute, you have gotten boards with kind of a history, but I remember when I interviewed you several years ago, they don't seem to affect you too much. You've never had a bad kind of encounter with that, correct?
No, correct. Prior to the museum, all these boards were in my house. Taking them from the TBHS, any donations, those were in my house. Nothing strange, nothing bad ever happened there. Nothing happens to me here in the museum. I do have a lot of guests who come in. First of all, there's a lot of guests who can't come in this room. So many people come to a Harry Potter store and they don't realize this is here in the back. And when they look through the archway and see the boards on the wall, they say Ouija boards and they leave. A lot of people come back by themselves because the person they're traveling with, taking a vacation with, are uncomfortable coming in this room. Some people come back here and they hold their chest and they say, I don't feel good or bad, I just feel heavy being in this room. I have had 2 people come in and shiver and shake in the middle of the floor and not want to go near the walls. So, people's reaction to these boards, people do put a lot of power into them.
Yeah. I want to. Now, you remember the board you donated to the Magic Parlor. I bought. It was in the trunk of my car for months because my ex-wife, now wife at the time, would not let me bring it into the house. You were there. We had a shaman come in. He was a bit dramatic. Some people believe it. Some people don't. But I don't know if you know the kind of backstory of what happened after that board. Were you familiar? Did anyone ever tell you?
No.
Okay. So I drove around with it in my car for several months, and I started getting a bunch of EVPs, coming through my radio. So as an example, I would drive to work. Usually I had the FM station on. I put AM on for some reason, and I went in the garage, and I drove into the garage and around the corners up to the top where you could kind of sneak and park for free. And I started getting these weird kind of demonic almost sounds, right? And after a couple of days, I never had that problem. I never had it on AM. And so I started repeating it. And finally, I recorded it, and I sent it to Mike Markowitz, who was the EVP specialist in the film. I don't know if you get to see that.
Of course, yes.
Yep. And so some of those EVPs that you hear are basically after I had that board in my trunk, were hiding me. And there was, there were a couple other ones too. And so that stuff started happening pretty regularly. And I just I gave the board to a witch, And, they've had no problems with it, since then. I mean, I know Rob, after a couple weeks after, there were a couple things flying off the shelf a little bit that he thought on the security camera. We couldn't quite connect it. But yeah, and then I had this weird type of experience. I've said this so people have listened to the podcast. I was in bed, again, facing my ex-wife at the time. She was asleep, and I literally felt my ribcage open, like as if someone reverse punched me in the stomach. Like it opened, and I felt something leap out of me. And it was one of those moments you're like, did that just happen? I'm awake. I'm wide awake. I'm not falling asleep, And it just felt like something fled away from me. My first thought was, is this my soul? I was like freaked out, or is this like some entity or whatever? One of the things, too, on one of the EVPs I got after that session was I used to always start my day with positive, affirmations. I used to, religious aspect, I thank the Lord my God, blah, 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 blah. And one of the EVPs, you might remember from the documentary, was F God.
Yeah, oh, yeah.
And I thought at the time, wow, because every day in the car, I'd start my day and my commute with my affirmation, my positive affirmation. So who knows if that's connected or not?
Sure.
Who knows? I know it seemed kind of weird when the shaman was there and he was kind of shaking the board and releasing stuff, and he felt stuff there. But personally, when we were there that day, the sound cut out. Remember that, the boom mic, it cut out. It was going into the receiver or whatever, but it wasn't going out. There was some weird stuff that happened, and so after the fact too, and then they got rid of the board, and they've had no experience with it. It's okay. So you never know with these Ouija boards. It may affect some people some way and others another, or who
Absolutely.
knows? It's tough.
It's funny how that goes. Some people, like myself, I don't feel anything being in the room. But then like I said, I have people who come in here and shiver and shake, and they definitely have a reaction to being around them.
Yeah, and now let's talk about the history of the Ouija board, if you don't mind, kind of where the name came from, and who's the first person that patented it, who's the person that got the name, that sort of good stuff.
Well, I think, to start the story, a lot of people are kind of don't realize that there's no inventor of these boards. These come about because the spiritualist movement in Ohio at the time, the mid-1800s, people are channeling spirits that they are claiming that are knocking responses back to them. So originally there's a lot of yes and no questions, and eventually they're having to count how many knocks to figure out what letter of the alphabet that they're on. So to speed that conversation up, they just introduce an alphabet board where they point to letters, wait for the knocks. Eventually someone takes an automatic writing planchette, which is a planchette very similar to any of the ones you're used to seeing here. The only difference has a pencil at the front of it, and a medium would channel a spirit through themselves, and they would write or draw onto a piece of paper whatever comes through. That device existed in France as early as 1848, and it kind of crossed paths with an alphabet board, and that's where we get a talking board. Wow. So everything from 1850 to 1890 is homemade, and in 1890 is when Charles Kennard has the idea to produce a board. He doesn't have a name for it, doesn't even have a factory. She actually goes to a local coffin maker and produces a board that he starts selling, calling it a witch board. And he does that for a few months until one night Helen Peters, she uses the board and she asks the board what it wants to be called, and the board spells back Ouija. She asks, what does it mean? And the board spells back good luck. So the board names itself.
Wow, that's a good start.
A lot of the history in the museum is if you tell the story long enough, it becomes the truth. Well, Helen, for instance, we only found out her story 7 years ago. She basically gets written out of history. Now we can finally retell the story. Manufacturers eventually would say they claim to be the inventor, which is not true, or that it means German and French for yes, yes, or the Egyptian good luck board, all these different things, just to help sell it and make it seem older than it really is. But it's not. It's defining a talking board as an alphabet board with a small table planchette to spell the letters. That is very American, and it's about mid-1800s.
Now, who was Helen Peters? Was she an older woman who had some money? Was she married? Did she work? Any backstory about who she was? Or?
So, first of all, she's the sister-in-law to Elijah Bond. Elijah Bond is the person that actually had the patent assigned to him.
Okay.
But she's the sister-in-law to him, and the two of them went to the patent office, where clerk after clerk, no one would sign off on the patent, until finally the chief patent clerk says, I don't know you, you don't know me, tell me my name and I'll give you the patent. Helen was a strong medium. She used the board, told him his name, and that's really how they secured the patent.
Wow, so she was a medium. I didn't know that. That's great. Wow, excellent.
Yeah, eventually, she gets written out of history, not only, I think, because male manufacturers don't want to include her, they want to say they invented the board or things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, for the past 10 or so seconds as I've been playing this back, I've been hearing an echoey voice in the background, and it doesn't sound like a customer. And so finally on this last take, you'll hear what sounds like thank you. So listen and let me know what you think, and then we'll get back to the interview.
things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so you heard me amplify it, and let me know. Now back to the interview.
But also she had a bad experience with the Ouija board. And so she ended up turning her back on it and moving away. Her and her husband moved away.
Do you know what that experience was? Or
I do. So her family owned property where there was Civil War battles.
Uh-huh.
And her family used to collect the buttons off of the dead soldiers' uniforms. And so it was kind of a prized possession, this jar of buttons. Well, anyways, it goes missing one day. And so Helen asks the board what happened to these buttons. And the board tells her that another family member had taken it. Now, she didn't believe the board. She didn't believe the board, but other family members did. And it actually caused a big rift between the family, so much so that, her and her husband moved out to Denver, Colorado to get away from the rest of the family.
Wow. Where did she live at the time? What state did she live in?
Back then, where it was named and patented, she was in Baltimore. Chestertown and Baltimore
right.
was the area.
Okay. Wow, and how has this museum been doing since you opened it up?
It's been great. I think it's going over really well. I was fortunate enough about 3 years ago, I did an exhibit at the Satanic Temple here in Salem.
Yeah.
And it was only supposed to be like a month-long, it was a lecture and a month-long display that ended up staying up for 3 months. And it was very successful there. And it kind of showed me that there was interest in this type of thing maybe being more permanent in Salem.
Yeah.
And so that was really the idea behind opening a museum.
Yep.
But I couldn't be happier. I love the space I have. I love who I'm working, connected with Remember Salem, Tim, who owns the Halloween Museum. And
Tim
whatnot.
McGuire, yep, he was in the. Now he has Remember Salem, and it was the Why Not shop.
The Wand shop next door.
Yep, and he's also he's a medium too, correct? He was in my film. He's
in your film. I don't know if he would claim to be. He would say he has. He can feel things.
Yeah.
I don't know if he would say he's a medium in the sense that like he could read things for you.
Yeah.
But I think he definitely has. He definitely is able to get sensations and feelings.
Yeah, he's had some weird stuff happen in the basement of the wand shop where he won't go down there alone. I mean, I remember he mentioned that. He's also a great historian, one of probably the better historians you're going to come across for Salem as well. So yeah, excellent. Yeah, and I got to tell you, I was so happy when I drove down here, and the traffic and the foot traffic outside blew my mind. I thought after like Salem was kind of shut down, for Halloween, it would be a little bit of a ghost town, no pun intended, but not at all. There's a lot of people out milling about and having a good time today in this beautiful weather, which is great.
And it happens again. You'll hear a voice say, "Not bad," in the background.
Beautiful weather, which is great. Beautiful weather, which is great. Beautiful weather, which is great.
Yeah, I think, when the city put in the restrictions for, curfews and whatnot, that the people that did stay away just stayed away until those curfews were lifted. And so weekend after Halloween, I think people are back, and I think November is going to be pretty busy.
Hey, everybody. This is your paranormal podcast pal, Bob Heskey. Every night I like to listen to videos on YouTube. But lately, with COVID, civil unrest, market volatility, politics, conspiracy theories, I just want to tune out. That's why I like Audible. What's Audible, you say? Audible is the leading provider of spoken word entertainment and audio books, including some great horror and paranormal titles like A Head Full of Ghosts by Paul Tremblay, If It Bleeds by Stephen King, and The Boatman's Daughter by Andy Davidson.
This place is cursed.
Each month, members get 1 credit to pick any title, plus 2 Audible originals from a monthly selection, access to daily news digests if you actually want to hear the news, as well as guided meditation programs. Hey, we all need a little zen now and again. And Audible is oh so easy. You can download titles and listen offline, anytime, anywhere, on any device. The app is free and can be installed in your smartphone or tablet. You can even listen across devices without losing your spot. How cool is that? If you can't decide what to listen to, no problem. You can keep your credits for up to a year and binge on your favorite series later on. So, here's the rub. The Afraid of Nothing podcast is stoked to partner with the audio bookworms at Audible to offer you a free 30-day trial membership. Just follow the link in the show notes, audibletrial.com/AON podcast.
Puedes repetir eso, por favor?
That's audibletrial.com/AON, all caps, podcast, lowercase. Full disclosure, I get a commission for everyone who signs up using that URL. But you get to try it for 30 days without a commitment. Using our custom URL doesn't cost you a penny and helps out the show if you do sign up. Nothing scary about that. So escape reality and pick up a book, an audio book, and listen to what's out there. Go to audibletrial.com/AON podcast after listening to the show.
Okay, now looking around this room, I mean, you could totally be mesmerized by all these boards on the wall. Give us 2 or 3 that are near and dear to your heart that you would show someone if they walked in here?
To me, one of my favorite boards in the museum is called the Electric Mystifying Oracle. It's made in the 1930s, and it's a metal talking board. The planchette that came with it was metal, had ball bearing casters and a battery inside of it. And on the board, there's these slight little bumps, and when the planchette would hit them, it would actually light up the planchette.
Wow.
And the company put all their capital into producing it, and it was a flop.
Really?
People loved it. They sent their salespeople out to demonstrate it. But in 1933, during the Depression, nobody
right before the war, right?
Exactly. So it was a higher priced board.
Metal
They wanted $5 for it, as opposed to a regular board sold for about $1.50. And so a couple of years later, World War II comes along, and they scrap them for the war effort.
God.
Today, we know of 7 boards and only 3 planchettes that still exist.
And you have one of the 7 boards over here. You don't have a planchette, but you know who has the 3 planchettes. And
I do. I know where the 7 boards are, and hopefully at some point someone will want to help me get it in the museum, because I tell that story so often every day.
Yeah.
It's one of many stories I tell, but that one in particular. And it would be a good addition to, a visual to go along with those stories.
Now, what would be, look, it's a value is subjective, but what would be a value of a board with the planchette like that? What do you think that would be?
It's almost impossible to tell you, Bob. To be honest with you, it's not that I'm avoiding the question, but I can tell you that how do you value something that has never sold online before?
Yeah.
There's nothing to compare it to. The only way to compare it is to pretty much profile all the other collectors. You have to know what people have in their collection, what they're missing from their collection, what the last thing they bought was, did they overpay for it. There's a lot of factors into figuring out who might come up with what money and what time it is. But for me, I can tell you that board, I wanted it so badly. When it came up for sale, I hopped in my car pretty much with no hesitation and drove straight to, picked up my friend Robert Murch, and we drove straight to Florida nonstop to get that board.
Wow. And we should talk about Robert Murch for a quick second. He's like the godfather of collecting Ouija boards, isn't he?
He really is the world historian when it comes to talking boards. He's been doing this for 30 years. And his research is really how we know Helen's story. A lot of these stories, it's through his actual research doing it.
I originally, when I was doing the documentary, I reached out to him. He was moving to Denver, Colorado, and he mentioned you, which I'm glad he did, actually. And he's had a little bit of some issues with some pain management, I think. We're wishing him well. How's he doing? Have you talked to him recently? Or?
I talk to him just about every day. I haven't talked to him yet today, but I talk to him every day, which is wonderful. He's my best friend. He's had a back surgery, a very short story, back surgery with a lot of complications. It's been a very long road of recovery from those operations. But the last couple months, he's been doing really well, and it's so great to have him back, because when he lived here in Boston, I was very lucky and fortunate to be able to see him on a very regular basis. And now that he's halfway across the country, I can only talk to him. I only get to go out there a couple times a year.
Yeah, I mean, people like him are kind of probably, they're unsung heroes, things like this. This is a great part of Americana and of Salem history. And if it wasn't for him, people wouldn't know a fifth of what they probably know about these books.
He shares everything he learns, what I love. He's not a collector who hoards things aside and just like, it's me, me, me. He really is one of the most generous people you'll ever meet. He shares all that information that he gets. Whatever he knows, I could know. Is he shares that. And he really is a mentor to me. He's a guy that has really made me want to be a better person because of just how he's cultivated a very unique group of collectors, which most collectors in other types of worlds usually fight against each other and try to outdo each other and backstab and get the item they want. And really, he showed that the friendships you have because of this is way more important than the actual object. These objects, I love owning them, don't get me wrong. And but with a group of my friends, that I'm happy for them. If I can't get something, I'm very happy they're able to add something to their collection. And so, he's made that a much better environment to be around, a very supportive environment, whereas coming from collecting other things before Ouija, we're very opposite.
No, and look, I was only probably a couple emails I had with him, but the sense I got was he considered you a protege almost, and really wanted to elevate you and what you've done. You've blossomed with this museum, so congratulations. 2 other boards you want to talk about in here that you'd point out?
One, we're sitting in this room right here, which is kind of, I call it the seance room. It's got a couch and it's kind of Victorian feel to it. And there's another donated board in this room. It's actually the Stranger Things board. And a lot of people think it's kind of funny because it's a newer board. But it's here for a few reasons. The first is that people that watch that show might not have realized that when she had the alphabet strung up on the wall, the light bulbs were lighting up the letters, and that was a talking board. Even though there wasn't a planchette, those light bulbs were lighting up the alphabet for her. She was speaking to her son on the other side. The other reason it's here is it changes a lot of people's perceptions as to how old something is to be haunted. Typically, you think something has to be very old to be haunted, not something from 2017.
Yeah.
But the previous owner of that board had a bad enough experience with it, so much so they spent $15 to $20 to mail it to the Talking Board Historical Society. They didn't put a return address on the package. They only put a note in with the board, and the note basically says, if you find it, forward it to the TBHS, because trust me, you don't want it.
Wow. Did you know, like in the Lizzie Borden house, did you know the story of the Ouija board
I
there?
do.
Okay,
It's a
cool.
great story. Yeah.
Do you want to share it? Because I didn't get that into the film because I had to cut stuff out. But do you want to tell that story?
Sure. So they had a Ouija board on display there. It wasn't unique. It wasn't original to the house, but it was something that they eventually acquired for there. It's like 1920s roughly. And at one point, a guest or somebody stole it, took it out of the museum, and just when they thought they would never see it again, it showed up back in the mail with a little note, and the note basically said that they were sorry for taking it, all these bad things had started happening to them since they had taken the board, and that they wanted to return it back to have the things end. So,
yeah. They didn't have the planchette, right? It was just the board,
just the board,
okay.
yeah.
All right, yeah, okay. Hey, going back to the metal board really quick, the surface, metal versus wood, does that make a difference? I mean, purists, would they also think, metal isn't very, good to the senses and doing the Ouija versus...
I think some people would claim that using a wooden board, there's more of a connection to the earth, that board would be better to use than, say, a plastic, or metal board.
But metal comes from the earth, too. It's just manufactured, but yeah.
But really, technically you could take a piece of paper and write out the alphabet on that paper, and it's going to work just as well as something you buy in the store. Because ultimately, the boards work based on what you believe.
Yeah.
If you have an uneasy feeling or you believe you have to, say a prayer, light a candle, or do anything like that, then those are things you should do to have the best experience possible.
Yeah.
But ultimately, the boards work based on the user, what they believe.
Okay, cool. All right, give us a third board. What's your last one if you had to pick one?
Well, my grandmother's board here, that's pretty awesome. That's a typical Ouija board from the 1930s. And that's the one that really set me down the rabbit hole. When I went online to find out more about it, it was like, well, that's an obvious, but the one underneath it, I'm in the middle of researching right now, and that is a big blue circle.
Yep.
And it's from 1970s, and it's called the Mantic Message Mat. And so that particular board comes from the estate of Geraldine Saunders. Geraldine Saunders was the first female cruise ship director. She wrote a book called The Love Boats, which became the TV show called The Love Boat. She was married to Henry Omar, who was an astrologist to the stars, and even though they were only married for a few months, she actually kept writing that column for years. She was engaged to a B-movie actor who was in Hercules versus the Cyclops, and she found him hanging dead in the shower, bound and gagged, with all these hypodermic needles in his arms, all this derogatory stuff written all over his chest.
God.
And a very fascinating life. She's a model. But anyway, she passed away just a few years ago. I met the person that bought...
Okay, so it happens again, and it's happened a couple times. And look, this is a museum. It's in a store. People are milling around. Not a ton of people, but people are there. But the things I'm pointing out are things where I don't actually hear a person in the background. It has that EVP type of sing-song tone. So I don't even know what this one says, but it's kind of a weird thing. But anyways, take a listen, see what you think. And then, just weird. In this room where it felt really cool, there could be a couple EVPs that we picked up. Who knows? You be the judge.
But anyway, she passed away just a few years ago. I met the person that bought all of her occult and astrology book, and he found 13 of those boards there. So that board was never sold in stores. It was really the one here on display has.
And it was 13, the number 13.
13. And so I flew out to California, and I basically acquired as many as I could. And that board was never sold in stores. It was only sold on the Pacific Princess, the Love Boat, whatever you want to call it, whatever cruise liner she worked for. The one here has these little notes that say you got to see the clerk for availability. It's an amazing board. It's one of the largest you'll see, 24 inches.
Yeah, it is.
It has like a 4-leaf clover planchette, plastic planchette with these little indentations for your fingertips to fit in there perfectly. It's beautiful, and it's one of my favorite boards because I'm in the middle of trying to research it now.
Yeah.
But it's one of my favorites for sure.
Now, a quick question. So, because I know Tim McGuire has had some ghostly things happening in this building and in the one next door. Has anybody reported anything since you've moved the boards in here? Anything or?
No, I have not. But I got to tell you, when I was moving things in a year, I've only been open a year. Last year, before I opened, people were coming in, neighbors, people that worked here, and I hear all sorts of stories. I hear the stories that he tells you in the documentary. You start hearing that in the basement over there, people are pushed or touched. They see things.
Yeah.
Personally, nothing's happened to me. But as you hear hundreds of stories, for me, I get jealous. I'm like, why am I not seeing anything?
Yeah.
But you believe it. I don't. All these Ouija stories I've ever heard, I've always believed they've experienced whatever they've told me.
Okay. Cool.
I might not believe that you can use a board and it can start raining in your house, or to get rid of a board, you light it on fire and it comes back to you. But I believe they believe.
Yeah, I gave you one example that happened to me too. So yeah. Cool. I think you have a person right there.
Oh.
I'm honestly just listening.
Oh, okay.
I'm learning so much. It's really awesome.
Oh, good.
Are y'all cool if I just listen?
Of course.
I'm learning a lot about Ouija boards. I really like it. So
Awesome.
sit down and listen.
Okay.
You want to say something about it being the podcast? We have a customer here right now, and we just want to kind of get her. What's your name?
Chandler.
Okay, let's tell us, what brought you here and what your interest is in the Ouija boards.
Okay. I've always found Ouija boards super interesting. I believe, I'm super into afterlife. I love all kinds of, the stories that you hear. And I personally, I don't see, shadow figures. I don't see, I do have, empath, connections to things. I'm really good at reading things, or, I can be drawn to something, or, really put off by things. So coming in here, I just wanted to see how that affected how I felt, and kind of if I felt overwhelmed or anything. Honestly, I'm just super excited to be in here. So it's just really, really cool, and I think that it's a thing that a lot of people just don't understand and don't know about.
Yeah.
And they get this idea that it's this evil, horrible thing, but then there's so much cool history behind everything. So I like the creepy stuff. So I'm a horror buff. So all the creepy stuff you can throw at me, I'm I'm ready. Let's do it.
Yeah, it's funny. John, and there's a couple of people I've met that aren't affected by stuff, and they seem to vibrate a little bit of a higher level, if you know what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
They're kind of not affected by stuff. He's one. There's another guy named Danny Perez. What was your feeling when you saw the caution tape on the Ouija boards as an empath? Did you pick up anything with that?
So that was actually one of the things that caught my eyes. My instant instinct was I wanted to touch it, but then I was I probably shouldn't, because that would be a very bad idea. I didn't get any crazy weird feelings, but I will tell you, I might be saying this wrong, but it's the Schneck board. I don't know.
Oh, the Shrek
Shrek
board.
board. There's a Shrek board, and when I saw it, I had this instant connection with it. And then when I saw the planchette to it, which is a coffin, I was this just all makes sense why I would be super connected to this board.
Sure.
But something about it, it's one thing that just catches my eye, and I'm that's it. This is what I'm drawn to, and I want to know why. But I didn't get super creeped out by the caution one. I was real interested in it, and then that note over there, I loved, because I'm all right, what happened here? You know what I mean?
Are you from around here? Or
I live in Dallas, Texas.
Okay, wow.
So, but I got married here on Halloween at the
Congratulations.
at the Witch Memorial site. Not this year, 4 years ago.
Oh.
But I've always been into the spooky witch scene. So this is the first time I've ever gotten to see all this stuff.
Just so you know, if you're ever looking for a board, they sell boards here, but also there's a website called Danny Radical, RADIKL.com, if you don't mind me giving a plug for him. He's a friend of ours. And he does he creates them himself. He gets like coffins, coffin board, and he creates them himself. So check out that website. He's doing one for me for my film, The Afraid of Nothing documentary, which is awesome. So, so check him out. So, well, thank you so much for your time. And hang out and listen if you want. But The Afraid of Nothing podcast, look for it online if you ever listen to podcasts. The Afraid of Nothing podcast. And this one will be up, by the way, probably by this time next week. So you'll be on it.
Well, thank you so much for asking.
Thank you.
I love it. Thank you so much.
I'm obsessed with everything here right now. So.
Awesome. Cool. Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you so much.
It's funny, Bob. She mentioned the Rick Schreck board over there. So Rick is not only the vice president of the Talking Board Historical Society, he's the brainchild for Ouijazilla, which I know is something we want to talk about.
Absolutely. Let's segue to that.
The board that's hanging up here that he did, it's from like around 2004, and it's very dark looking. It's got pentagrams, skulls. People are drawn to it as one of the more evil things in the museum. Sitting right next to that board is some artwork that Rick did that are basically board rules. The TBHS use those for shirts. And it's a lot of the superstitions, or as Gene from the Museum of Talking Boards would call them, Ouija-stitions that people have about the boards. Playing alone, don't play in a graveyard, always say goodbye, those kind of things. But his artwork is amazing. It's very dark. What I love about Rick is he saw the movie Witch Board, and to him, he was like, wait, that's how you open a portal? Is you have boards? So he became a collector and literally started hanging hundreds of boards around his house trying to open a portal. And so that those board rules, those are more of his to-do list. Most people are like, don't do these things. That's his to-do list.
That's funny. Yeah, talk about Ouijazilla, that hugest board of all time.
Sure. Ouijazilla cannot be denied. It is the world's largest talking board. Rick had the idea for this. He had done a few other pretty big projects. He owns a hearse like Danny, and he made a Ouija board that pulls out of the back, and you could use it. He had done a board in front of his house where you could go up to like this little planchette that would light up the letters, like literally almost a billboard in front of his house. And eventually, Ouijazilla crossed his mind. He wanted to do the world's largest. And so he spent a year hand painting 99 sheets of plywood. Each sheet was 4 feet by 8 feet, weighed 70 pounds apiece. And he would project the image on the wall onto the board. He could never lay out more than 4 or 5 of these boards at a time to make sure that everything was lining up correctly. He worked, with no air conditioning, no heat, and so there's videos of him literally with a hairdryer trying to dry the paint on these boards. So a full year before finally we worked with Ripley's Believe It or Not. They came and filmed the packing of the board from New Jersey, shipping it up here to Salem. I had worked with the city to get permission, use the Salem Common.
Yep.
We basically spent 3 days building the thing. None of us are construction people or whatever. Built this giant frame. We had to enlist a lot of friends to travel from pretty good distances to come out to help us with it. We were able to build it through some of the worst elements. It poured rain one day, and it smashed the record. It was 2.5 times larger than the previous previous record, and which was a hotel roof. So
what was the square footage?
I forget off the top. It was 99 sheets of plywood, 4 feet by 8 feet.
Wow.
So it's big.
99?
99.
Oh, my God. Could people walk on that?
Sure.
So, wow. And you had a huge planchette. Talk about the planchette, how big that was.
The planchette was 400 pounds. One person could move the planchette. It was on wheels.
Yeah.
But we had 4 people kind of used it best. It was large enough to, get into the center of it, the whole of it. And it worked. I mean, we had to prove that it worked as far as, being functional to get the record. Yeah, Rick did an amazing job with it, and right now it was only up on display for about 30 hours.
Yeah,
a year's worth of work to go, to build it, to have it all together. It was out on display for about 30 hours before we had to pack it up, and it went back to New Jersey. And right now, the next place we're hoping it's going to go is the Denver International Airport. Years ago, we had worked with the San Francisco airport, had done a display. Gene Orlando had put together a display out there, and it was well received, so much so that the Denver International Airport wants to do it. When you're walking between terminals, they have like these museum cases.
That's so great.
And then eventually they would want to put Ouijazilla on the tarmac, so when you're flying overhead, you can look down and see it.
Oh, my God.
And if you know anything about the Denver International Airport, there's a lot of conspiracy theories behind it, as it's built on top of a military base or some other military installation. There's like all sorts of like subliminal messages, like in the murals there and everything.
Yeah.
So it's kind of the perfect place. If you ever go,
I was going to say, the flip side, some people would probably be very nervous about that, like a plane flying over an Ouija board and says goodbye.
It's like the Bermuda Triangle of America. Absolutely. Yeah. What's going to happen?
God. I should let the listeners know that John and I are being safe with social distancing. We're both wearing masks. We're a little muffled just because of that, but I think it's sounding good. So yeah, we're all being safe here in Massachusetts, even though there's a bit of a spike. You mentioned there's a Paracon in Michigan that you're going to.
Michigan, yeah, sure. Michigan Paracon. It was supposed to happen. They had to cancel this most recent September, where most of the TBHS was going to be there. Rick would be there with the Ouijazilla planchette, and we were bringing all these donated boards. You know, the board you taped for the documentary, and the few that are here. Well, I actually have a couple dozen donated boards from over the years.
When you say donated boards, you're talking about that have backstories where people feel there's some bad stuff attached to it.
Exactly.
Right? So you're bringing, and how many roughly are you bringing to that?
About 2 dozen of them.
Wow, okay. There's some. That'll be interesting, man, in terms of like the karma of people walking up and what they sense.
But it tells a lot of different stories, because some of them, you know, I collect the stories.
There's a book. There's a coffee table book in that.
Oh,
I think.
Definitely is. I mean, what people believe is certainly a book.
Yeah.
Because so many people believe different things.
Yeah.
You know, but like I said, that's how the board works. It works on your belief.
Yeah.
And so, you know, the superstitions of those boards, but also just people's reaction to them and how close they want to get to them, or how far away they want to stay away from them.
Yeah.
You know?
If you ever do a book, let me know, because I should be one of the chapters, you know, based on that one. I could track down the one that you got to the Magic Parlor with my friend Rob Fitch. Okay, cool. Let's go on. Let's circle. 2 more things I want to cover are the Talking Board Historical Society, which your friend Mr. Birch, I think,
he's the president.
Is the president and founder. Yep, let's talk about that. And then I want to talk about your music side of you. A lot of the people in the paranormal, and even in filmmaking, the sound people, usually the sound guy is a bassist. Sure. I always find out the sound guy is it never fails, you know, on when I do a film. But yeah, let's talk about the Talking Board Historical Society.
The TBHS is really just founded by a group of collectors that just all shared the same passion for this history. And really around the time that Murch had discovered Elijah Bond, the person that patented the board, that we'd found out he was buried in an unmarked grave. So really the first thing was raised money to put a headstone in for him. And that kind of was like the first project that we did. And since then, you know, we've put in a headstone for Helen Peters, the person that asked the board what it wanted to be called.
Was she in an unmarked grave too, or?
Yeah, so her...
What is with that?
Well, her and her husband died so poor, they were buried in a friend's family plot. We knew where she was, but their names were never added to the stone. So with the other families that were there, they gave us permission to put in not only a headstone for them, but for Helen and her husband.
Okay.
And what I love about that is we tell her story, and the cemetery there embraced that history right away. They added her to Prominent Women of Denver tours, all the October, Halloween kind of tours, and it's a very well visited grave. It's great because that history is lost.
Yeah.
Like I said, it was only uncovered 7 years ago. And if you looked in the encyclopedia, it would tell you William Fuld was the inventor and manufacturer of these boards. Helen wouldn't be listed. And so the story is slowly getting out there, especially by the cemetery embracing that history and wanting to teach it to people, that people can find out the real truth of where the Ouija board, where the Ouija name comes from.
That's so awesome, because I forget, Jeff Belanger told me this one time. It's about everybody has 3 deaths. There's a death when you die. I think the second one was a death when your family lineage ends or whatever. And then there's the third one was when people mention your name for the last time, and it's almost like you've resurrected those 2 people, you know, Elijah Wood and Helen Peters, because they're forgotten about and now they're still alive, which is such a great thing, you know.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, that's probably one of my proudest things is, besides being in a group with my friends, to actually do something that's going to have a longer legacy than myself. You know, leaving these headstones with these stories being told, it's awesome.
Yeah. So let's talk about, before we talk about the musical side of you, if people want to check out your museum or the Talking Board Historical Society or support it, give us a couple plugs or a couple ways on how they can do that.
Sure. I mean, both the groups are on Instagram, so Salem Witch Board Museum, Talking Board Historical Society, both on Instagram and Facebook. From there, they can learn whatever the next project we're doing, some of the history that we share, and those would be the 2 best places.
Is there any way they can buy a board or provide financial support or anything like that? Or
the TBHS has a website as well you can link to that has not only merchandise for shirts and donations, and the Salem Witch Board Museum, I will post things for sale occasionally. I don't use social media that way.
Yeah.
I have no problem shipping items or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I just don't look at it that way as like this thing to sell. I have stuff in the museum to sell, and I really like to try to have as much stuff here as possible so that the guest gets the best experience. They get first shot at a lot of these rare things that I have for sale. Now that it's slowing down outside of October, now I'll be posting some things for the rest of the public.
And if someone, their mother dies and they get a house in the attic, they find 100 Ouija boards, who should they contact to send that?
The Talking Board Historical Society.
Okay.
And they can do it either through the webpage, through the Facebook or Instagram pages, any way online. And I'll give them all the information they need to where they can send it and everything, and start to ask the stories, because again, we like to collect the stories with these.
Cool. Now let's close about you sent me one of your songs. Tell them what the name of the song is and kind of talk about your band and the music side of you.
Yeah, so that song in particular is called What Does Franny Know? And that's actually about my grandmother, Frances, or Franny, as I would jokingly call her. And she's the one that sent me down the rabbit hole with these,
Oh, that's
my
great.
interest in Ouija boards. The song is a somewhat fictional story account of her using the Ouija board, but it's based on her. But no, I've been playing music for well over 30 years. I didn't go to college after high school. I basically moved to the city, joined as many bands as I could, and at one point I was juggling as many as 6 bands. And for a while I got a reputation that I would quit my job and go on tour with bands at last minute. People, all of a sudden, someone couldn't go on tour because their job wouldn't allow them to, or they'd come to me and say, hey, we're going to go away in a month. Can you learn all our songs? And
2 questions. What's your favorite band that you're part of? Or is there a band that you fronted for that's like famous that you was kind of cool that you were in a concert with?
There was a band that I would say is notorious. I wouldn't say necessarily famous, but definitely notorious. And I've played with a lot of big bands. I've toured with quite a few. I just say go look it up yourself.
You're a humble guy. What do you play? You play bass guitar? Do you play electric?
Everything. I get mostly electric guitar, but I've played bass in bands.
Do you sing too, or are you just mostly?
I do.
That's awesome. Yeah. Do you sing on that, Franny?
No, that's Myra. That's a girl singer.
Okay.
I do the backups on it and stuff. But
okay, cool.
Yeah, I front plenty of bands. For me, I've played in well over 30 bands altogether. Helped tour.
That's another museum you got to set up, John. Okay, if we want to follow your music or support your music, anywhere we go for that? I know you're not a big social guy, but what if they wanted to check out?
Some of the current bands I play in are Kill Slug, the Demon Seeds, Crimson Ghosts, or Evil Streaks. Those are 4 bands that I still play and active with right now.
And what was the first one again?
Kill Slug.
All right, John. Well, thank you so much for your time today. What a great, you do so much to support Ouija, and this is an excellent addition to Salem, which has so many landmarks already. So thank you for what you do, and thank you for taking the time today.
I appreciate you having me on here, and thank you so much. I'm glad to be able to work with you again. It's been a while. It's been 2 years since the documentary, and I'm just like to have you in the museum and see for yourself.
Cool, John. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bob.
You've been listening to the Afraid of Nothing podcast. Please subscribe and like us on Facebook. Until next time, stay scared.
Hey, you're still here? Great. Then why not listen to another episode? Visit afraidofnothingpodcast.com to peruse all the shows. That's afraidofnothingpodcast.com. And while you're there, click the coffee cup icon to buy me a coffee and leave a review. I'll give you a shout-out in an upcoming episode, and the world will know how swell you are.